070 CSX 7807 westbound, no defects, 158.5.
Hello folks, today's video will be the beginning of a new series to reintroduce my rail fanning content. This video will cover some of CSX's railroad territory in southern Maine, featuring the southern half of the Waterville subdivision that begins in Yarmouth, Maine, going northeast and terminating at Mattawamkeag, interchanging with the New Brunswick Southern Railway along the former Maine Central, then Pan Am Railway's main line, with another interchange in the middle of this subdivision in Herman, Maine, with the Canadian Pacific Railway that operates the former Bangor and Aroostook trackage, which was then preceded to the Montreal, Maine and Atlantic Railway, then the Central Maine and Quebec Railway, and currently the Canadian Pacific Railway. Come join me in my scattered trek along the Kennebec River and Portland's waterfront on my first episode of Maine Railroading, featuring the southern half of the Waterville subdivision. Friday night's LO70 West is seen leaving the modestly quiet town of Waterville. The crossing at Main Street is a quiet zone, as well as all of the other crossings here. LO70 is taking their time leaving the yard due to CSX's yard speed limits, where as long as a train's length, head end or tail end is occupying trackage within yard limits, is required to do no more than around 10 miles per hour. When chasing this job, this makes for a good head start to catch them getting up to speed. When chasing this job, it is very easy to get lots of shots between their westbound trip to Rigby Yard and their return trip back to Waterville Yard. What usually happens when doing a chase of this job is that the crew generally leaves west for Rigby after doubling up their train at Waterville Yard around 8 to 8:30 at night when running their night schedule. When LO70 runs this schedule, they usually end up at Rigby Yard around 10 to 11:30 at night and not heading back east for at least another hour. When on their daylight schedule, LO70 heads west out of Waterville Yard just shy of noon, then departing Rigby Yard for their return trip east at around 2 in the afternoon. When they run east during the daylight, there are lots of good photo opportunities where you can get well-lit shots, following them the whole way to Waterville with plenty of daylight. Here in Monmouth, one of my favorite spots to film at is on Main Street, aka Route 132. This crossing is what I'm led to believe at least the Guilford-era crossing equipment. The gateless crossing here features a mechanical crossing bell, thin metal piping, an older General Railroad signal, aka GRS halogen crossing lights. One thing to note is that the oscillating crossing lights take longer to fade and are slightly dimmer than most older railroad crossings. My favorite part of living in New England is that most of our railroad crossings, besides the CSX Portland Subdivision that was recently refurbished, have old-fashioned railroad crossings that have mainly original equipment that was only overhauled a few decades ago in the earlier days of Pan Am. One thing you'll come across when chasing this train is the fact that you generally have audible warning with a good amount of time before the train approaches you. Here in Auburn, LO70 is going right through the border of two towns, Lewiston and Auburn, Maine. In this section of the line, trains have to go through 12 grade crossings between Lewiston and the Little Androscoggin River in Auburn. Winding back to the cold Saturday of September 20th, I found myself with a free weekend and decided to wait in Waterville for LO70's departure. This night's train was a lash-up worth seeing. An active C40-8W locomotive in CSX's YN3B paint scheme leading the consist, an ex-Seaboard Family Line System SD40-2 trailing second, an ex-Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad SD40 trailing third, and an ex-Canadian National GP40-2LW last in the consist. For this chase, I was doing half videography and half photography, so I did not get them leaving Waterville Yard on video, but I did film the rest of the chase going west. To get back about what I had mentioned earlier, with being able to hear trains a while before they get to you, is going to be a clip I recorded exactly 18 minutes before LO70 had finally activated the crossing. The following footage is real, raw audio of what I heard whilst LO70 was climbing the grade approaching Monmouth. At 10:23, LO70 had finally tripped the circuit to activate the crossing. Ending my chase that night in Auburn, I set myself up at Library Ave, directly across from a trackside Denny's. If you are ever in the area and are trying to see LO70, as long as you know it's coming, you can tune into the radio frequency 160.620 on any radio scanner to listen for the crew to call out for the nearby defect detector. As I said earlier, any trains operating through this area between Lewiston and Auburn have to go through 12 grade crossings. Now, I will let you listen to the continuous horn blowing for each and every one of those railroad crossings. For my last shot of the night, I only recorded the engines going by. I had a roughly 3-hour drive back home, so I decided not to overdo myself and just head home after catching them in Auburn. Cutting back to a warm evening in August, I had headed to Portland to meet with a good railfan friend of mine to chase LO70. This time, I'd cut LO70 going west into Rigby and then going back east to Waterville before sundown. Today's train had again a nice arrangement of power. Although most railfans disliked them, there was an ex-CSX Pan Am B40-8 paired with a set of ex-Canadian National GP40-2 wide cabs, with one being the Guilford Heritage unit that had been repainted into Guilford's black and orange paint. At the time, CSX still had a few original Guilford paint locomotives running on the roster. However, nowadays, Maine Central 507 is the only active unit to be featuring the Guilford rail system paint scheme. CSX had sidelined all the GP40 standard cabs and all the remaining GP40-2 wide cabs that were painted in Guilford Rail System's black and orange paint. Roughly a half hour later, we returned trackside after getting late lunch at the sub shop The Angelos in town. We decided to begin our chase at Reed Street in Portland, where the trains begin to pick up speed. their return trip east, LO70 had retained the same two C40-8Ws and GP40-2LW MEC516, but also picking up a Blue Dip Pan Am Railways painted B40-8 for Waterville. Continuing east, we located ourselves in the small town of Danville. At timetable location Danville Junction, this is where CSX interchanges with a Genesee, Wyoming subcompany, the St. Lawrence and Atlantic, reporting mark SLR and SLQ, St. Laurent and Quebec for Canadian-owned property. Jumping ahead again, I am now set up in the countryside of Lewiston on Merrill Road. This crossing has a Maine Central era searchlight signal that serves as an automatic block signal, aka an ABS. At this location, trains tend to pick up their speed slightly after going through the crossing pack section between Auburn and downtown Lewiston. This area is great for videography and photography with the right lighting. Just north or timetable east of here is a split-off called Leeds Junction in the town of Leeds, Maine. Leeds is home to a small Amish community and marks the beginning of the CSX Rumford branch. After catching the train at Merrill Road, we jumped ahead to the town of Winthrop, where we found ourselves following the train along the water. Our last chase spot before we approached the outskirts of Waterville was at Bartlett Road in Belgrade. This crossing, going west, is just before the defect detector in Redfield. Belgrade, going west, is where trains generally begin to pick up their speed. Now we found ourselves the next town over from Waterville in Oakland at an older railroad crossing with searchlight signals, Oak Street in Oakland. If you pay attention closely, look through these passing center beams and you will see the double-headed searchlight signal off to the left. This marks the end of this video/documentary. I hope you enjoyed this video, even with the small editing quirks and whatnot. I am bound to produce something on the whole line, or maybe even just the northern half, completing the whole line. With that, look out for other videos soon on CSX's Portland Subdivision, the New Hampshire North Coast, and Massachusetts railroading. Thanks for watching, and if you like content like this, don't be afraid to subscribe to my channel and turn on video notifications. Thanks again, viewer, for watching a C40-8 production.